What is going on? It is At the Letters, presented by Miller Lite, the original light beer, and today is July 22nd, 2021. My name's Arden Swelling. Ben Nicholson Smith is back. We are back at the Letters, rolling on for the final couple months of the regular season and into the playoffs as well. And our producers this week are Andrew Norton and Mike Tassoni. Ben, it's always funny, like, just what has happened immediately prior to recording a podcast, because that just kind of like just impacts the mood around the whole team. Like, can you imagine if we recorded this like on Monday after the Blue Jays blow out the Texas Rangers 5,000 runs to nil? But we aren't. We're recording it here on Thursday after the Blue Jays dropped to a division rival, the Boston Red Sox, and two pretty tough losses. You would have liked to take at least one of those games if you're the Blue Jays. But I do think, like, if we really zoom out and we really pull back and you look at this last month of Blue Jays baseball, since June 19th, you have a team that is 15-9. That's a 625 winning percentage. And we have been saying for a while now, at some point, the Blue Jays are going to have to go on a run. They're going to have to outperform what they've done to this point. They're going to have to be better. I feel like the run is now. And I feel like the run is happening. And it's no longer the Blue Jays have to go on a run. It's the Blue Jays have to sustain this run that they are on. Because if they continue winning at a 625 clip, even just a 600 clip for the rest of the season, they're going to end up with 90 plus wins, and they're going to put themselves in a pretty good position.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, you look at how the perception is around this team, and I think it is a little different, as you say, depending on what happens in the last few days. But the problem with this team right now isn't what's happening on the field lately. It isn't the state of the roster currently. It's more so the losses that piled up at the end of May and beginning of June and left them in this spot that they're in right now, where they are still hovering around 500 despite, as you say, having gone on a pretty good run, playing some good baseball. I look at this roster right now, I'm like, this is a good team. This is a good baseball team. They've got a lineup that clearly is one of the best in baseball. Starting pitching now has some questions, but the bullpen's coming around a little bit. And I just think they are in a position to sustain this to some extent. Really, how well they can sustain it, how much they can build on this current streak, 15-9, as you say, will determine, whether they get to that 90-win threshold or not. But the team that we're watching right now, recent losses to the Red Sox aside, is a good baseball team.
They're basically healthy for the first time all year. Like, there aren't really any substantial players that are out here. Like, Alek Manoah, sure, but he's expected to make his next start after, suffering a little back contusion there. You could throw Julian Merriweather in there, I guess. Like, he'd certainly help having him available, but it's not like he was super available earlier this season. Obviously looked great in the short burst that the Blue Jays had him. But outside of that, it's not like you're, dealing with the George Springer uncertainty anymore. It's not like you're dealing with, multiple relievers like going down every just throughout the course of a week. Like, essentially the team is healthy, so essentially the team is what it is right now. It gives the Blue Jays just kind of a more interesting platform to work off of as they look ahead to maybe making some additions in a week at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and they absolutely have to be in on those additions. It is, you do still look back and think about some of those missed opportunities, but as they move forward and try to build on this run and try to look to ways to augment the team, I think there are clear pathways here for them to make this team better. And it sounds as though, listening to Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins as they talk about this team, it sounds like they're very clearly focused on adding to this team. I think to some extent how they do in the course of the next 8 days does impact the exact direction this team will go. I mean, I'm not sure exactly to what extent the team's performance on the field will end up shaping things, but I think to some extent it has to. To some extent it has to impact the way you look at this roster and the way you try to improve this team, just because 8 games, that's still some chunk of the season that you have to take into account.
Maybe it impacts how aggressive you are on like pure rentals, I guess. Like I maybe there, I don't know, man. If you're looking at acquiring a guy who's like quote unquote controllable, like a guy with additional years beyond just this one, I think the Blue Jays be in on that regardless. of
Yep.
how well or how poorly they're doing, right? Like, so that's why I'd kind of disagree a little bit with what you just said, because and you hear things like that around this time of year, right? Like, will so and so impact the Blue Jays approach, right? If they win all these games against the Red Sox, what will they start pushing all in? Or if they lose all these games against the Red Sox, like, it's a time to sell or whatever. Like, I just don't think that the wins and losses over the last week, over the last 2 weeks, over the next week to come is really going to meaningfully impact the Blue Jays approach, honestly. Like, I think that it's just, at this point, like, they are so cold and calculated about it, and they're so, like, just, systemic and, like, process oriented, and like, they make their decisions so objectively that there really isn't, a run of wins or a string of losses that could really impact what they're going to do on July 30th.
And I think if they go, 3-4 versus 4-3, totally agree with you. What I'm talking is more on the edges of things. Like, if they go from this point as we record this on Thursday, if they go undefeated now until the deadline, which, like, it could happen. They've got a good baseball team. They're, as you said, they're pretty healthy. If they honestly go undefeated, I think that pushes them closer toward, all right, the Cubs are asking for an arm and a leg for Craig Kimbrell. Maybe we have to really look at this. Maybe we have to, and again, he's a guy with a year beyond 2021. So that's a player who should be on their radar anyway. So, maybe the better example there is a Nelson Cruz. The Twins are, he's the last year of his contract, and he's someone who could help this team now, a pure rental. Do the Jays up the ante if they're going 1-7 in the next 8 games? I think that's where it starts to shift a little bit, and it becomes a little bit less likely that they would do that kind of trade. But certainly, if you're talking about someone with a bit more control, let's say it's, for argument's sake, Jose Barrios or Kyle Gibson, one of those pitchers who's available beyond 21, I totally agree that that's someone that makes sense now and in the future.
Yeah, controllable guys they're going to be in on regardless. Yeah, I guess it is just the rentals. And it is, like, it's funny, right? Because we always reference Fangraphs playoff odds when we talk about the team and what they're going to do going forward. And I know, like, people roll their eyes at the playoff odds, right? And they're just kind of like, well, whatever, nerd, like, with your spreadsheets. Like, this doesn't mean anything. You got to play the actual games. But I feel like we use them because the Blue Jays internally have their own proprietary playoff odds and their own percentages that they put on things, and they use that to inform their decision making. So I just feel like Fangraphs playoff odds, or baseball prospectus, whatever your favorites are, like the publicly available ones, that's the best we have. So that's kind of what we work off of. So, like, I think, like, I agree with you when it comes to the rental market. Like, look, if you have 60-70% plus chance of reaching the postseason, you're probably going to be more aggressive on pure rentals and guys who are only going to be Blue Jays for 2 months, and you might pay higher prices for those dudes. But if you're looking at, like, 35 to 40% chance of reaching the postseason, well, then you're probably going to be more conservative at the deadline and be less involved with a pure rental that's going to cost a higher price than something else that you're looking at.
For sure. And I mean, the interesting thing about the Jays is they can really keep their eyes open across the board. And this is probably true for most contenders. But, at this point, with Pearson coming back as a reliever, that does augment the bullpen a little bit. So maybe it takes away just a little bit of the urgency away. Not that you want to count on it, not that you want to just assume that he's going to go and be an incredible setup man right away. But the bullpen is in a better spot now, with Simber certainly pitching well. You've got the bullpen in a better spot than it was a month ago. We can go that far for sure. So you could look at bullpen, you could look at rotation, and you could look at position players too, which does give them a lot of different avenues to explore. And from everything that Atkins and Shapiro are saying, they're pretty consistent when it comes to saying the run prevention is what they want to do. But they do have different avenues open to them. So, Nelson Cruz to me is someone who's really interesting in the sense that, what's his market, right? The Twins kind of have to unload him if they want to get anything of value for him. He's one of their most logical trade pieces. Red Sox have a DH. Astros have a DH. JD Martinez is not about to go to play the field, and nor is Yordan Alvarez. So then who are the actual contenders in the American League? Because Cruz is an American League player. What are the actual contenders? So you start looking around. Oakland, Tampa, Toronto, those are the fits that I see for someone like Nelson Cruz. And because the Blue Jays don't have a full-time DH, someone who's, quote unquote, eating up those at-bats every day, that does open up the opportunity to some of those unconventional possibilities. And a guy like Nelson Cruz would be on that list of outside the box alongside their search for pitching.
Yeah, the Cruz thing, when I first heard it, whatever, weeks, months ago or whenever it was, I was like, my just immediate gut reflex reaction was like, no, it's not it's not a fit. That doesn't make sense for the Blue Jays. Why would they add a guy who doesn't play the field and is 70 years old and et cetera? But the more I think about it, I can kind of see it. And the more I look into it, I could kind of see it for this club for some of the reasons you mentioned, right? If you're the Twins, man, your leverage is not high. You can only trade this guy to half the league. And of that half of the league, how many of those teams are looking to add a guy like Nelson Cruz at the deadline, right? So it's a pretty limited field. So you would think that when this comes down to July 30th, and I would expect the Nelson Cruz market to come down to literally
Agreed.
July 30th, perhaps within an hour before the deadline, the price shouldn't be particularly high. And if you're the Blue Jays and you can get them for a very reasonable price, you're giving up some sort of prospect that you don't really think he's going to have a massively impactful big league career. Well, maybe you just do it and deal with the roster implications later. And you just figure it out, right? And if Nelson Cruz is a guy who only starts 3 times a week as a DH and then otherwise comes off your bench as a big bench bat, maybe that's okay, right? Maybe you deal with the fact that an outfielder is going to lose some playing time going forward. You find a way to deal with that because you are adding a premium bat. And so while it isn't the most obvious fit, and it doesn't it's not a seamless thing to bring him in, maybe that actually does end up making a lot of sense.
I mean, it would just make their lineup so stacked. You think about Semyon, Bichette, Vlad, Springer, Cruz, Teoscar. So Teoscar Hernandez now is your 6 hitter. He's an all-star, a guy who's basically performing at an elite level and has for the last, 180 games that he's played, and that's your 6 hitter. So yes, it would mean a reduction in playing time for Grichuk, Gurriel Jr., or both. But it would make this offense just so scary. And yes, it would be very right-handed. And yes, Cruz is 41 years old, and you never know when it's going to stop working. But you're not acquiring him on a long-term contract. You're just acquiring him for a couple months. So I am intrigued by that one. And of course, it comes down to price. You're not trading Jordan Groshans to get Nelson Cruz. But no. I think there are scenarios there where I'm pretty intrigued by that, especially at a time that you do look around at the starting pitching market, and I don't see a ton out there. That's what the Blue Jays say publicly. They're not seeing a ton out there. It doesn't, unless there are kind of these secret trade candidates that are going to emerge in the next week, which is always possible. But it's hard to see a ton of depth to that starting pitching market.
Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a ton of upside in the starting pitching market, but I do think there are sort of league average dudes who eat innings who will be available. And I don't know, it might not even be fair to lump Cal Gibson into that, right? Because he's been having such a strong season, but there are certainly reasons to believe that his performance might decline depending on how much weight you put into a lot
already has the last 2 starts.
Right. So, it depends on how you feel about that recent sample and how much weight you put into the expected statistics. And obviously, this is a time where teams are scrutinizing these players to the nth degree. So, I promise you the Blue Jays have a very clear, way that they project Kyle Gibson going forward. And it might look a lot different than what his performance has been to this point. But even beyond him, you think about guys like a Tyler Anderson out of Pittsburgh, right? Or a Mike Minor or Merrill Kelly, these totally unsexy, not exciting, not Jose Barrios types, right? But the middle rotation depth that every team needs, and that helps insulate you against a potential injury to the top of your rotation. If Robbie Ray tweaks an oblique, or say Hyun-Jin Ryu has another lapse in effectiveness, we kind of saw for a few starts there last month. So I think the Blue Jays should be in that market for those kind of mid-tier, unsexy starters. And that's why I kind of see it both ways, where it's like, yeah, is this a good starting pitching market for the Blue Jays? Like, maybe not, because there aren't a lot of top tier options, but maybe it also can be a sneaky good starting pitching market for the Blue Jays because there's not a lot of teams buying. Because who are the other buyers for starting pitchers, right? You got to think like the Dodgers, Mets, Giants. I'm not sure I see anyone else there is going to be, obviously competing with them for the Tyler Andersons and Mike Minors of the world. So maybe you can make some more like low cost, sneaky, impactful additions at the deadline, a la Robbie Ray, Taijuan Walker last season.
It's really interesting. I mean, I think that so much of this too depends on how they assess Ross Stripling and what they make of his last 2 starts, which have been pretty rough after a period of time of like 6 weeks where he was really good. And, it seemed like things were trending in a great direction for him. Obviously, Manoah's health is another variable. Sounds like they think he'll start Monday, so he should be back relatively soon. But, you got to know what you have internally before you can kind of determine how aggressive you're going to be. I think with respect to those high-end options like Barrios and Kyle Gibson, I do see the Dodgers as a team in on them, and I see the Mets as a team in on them. And then you're right. Beyond that, it's hard to come up with a ton of teams that you see being super aggressive. Like, the Rays aren't going to trade for Jose Barrios. That's, if they had him, they would trade him away. That's not the kind of move that that they would make. So, are the Red Sox going to do it? Maybe. There's a case to be made for it, but I think Chris Sale is probably their quote-unquote deadline addition when it comes to their starting rotation. So, yeah, I think the Jays are well-positioned to certainly have a fallback acquisition for the back of the rotation if that's the path they want to go down. And you might need it because there's still a lot of baseball left. And we say this all the time, but you never want to be too comfortable when it comes to your starting pitching depth, even if you have a Thomas Hatch who's ready to step in and contribute in a role, at some point relatively soon. So they got to be in on that. But I look at bullpen too, and I think as much as things have restabilized, there's opportunity here to improve it significantly. So there are a lot of different options for this ball club in the next week or so.
Yeah, it's the easiest thing in the world right now to sit here and say, here's what the Blue Jays' flaws are, right? And here's where they have needs. Like, anybody can do that. And I agree with you. Obviously, the bullpen needs to continue to be addressed. The floor has been solidified. There's still holes in the ceiling. And Jordan Romano cannot be your only high leverage late inning starter. And even he's like, clearly kind of dealing with some adjustments he's having to make with his slider right now, and some spin rates that have fallen off in a very big way right after the crackdown on foreign substances. So he's clearly going through a period where he's like kind of, redefining how he's pitching right now. So that throws him into question a little bit as well, although I still think you feel really good about him in the 9th inning. But you look at any postseason club, any successful team, they have like 3 or 4 of those dudes, not 1.5 in Romano and Rafael Dolis, right? So you need more leverage relievers with premium velocity and swing and miss secondary stuff who can get you strikeouts, because Adam Simber isn't getting you a ton of strikeouts. Like Trevor Richards will get you some, but he's not getting you like premium high leverage strikeouts necessarily. So I think there definitely is still a hole there. But like, I think what the Blue Jays approach to the deadline, I think honestly over the next week, is just kind of like wait and see, and like see how the market develops and see how prices fluctuate, right? What goes up, what goes down, and you get to the 30th and you just have this insanely stressful crunch time day where like, the phone line, the texts are burning up, and you're seeing where teams are at, what they're going to do, what prices are, what's gone up, what's gone down, and you just kind of try to execute in that like really constrained time frame on July 30th. Because I think the Blue Jays really, like, instead of targeting, trying to fill like specific needs, I think they're just looking for impact overall. And like impact can come in various ways, right? It's not always the obvious one. So if it comes down to it on July 30th, Blue Jays don't love the deals that are on the table for pitching, maybe they just go all in on hitting and on offense, right? Like you could go out and get half a win from a reliever, or you could get a full win from a hitter, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to take the hitter, right? Because that then has a bit of a a carryover effect, a bit of a trickle down effect on the bullpen indirectly, because now, even though you didn't address, your bullpen fully, that bullpen is protecting a bigger lead than it would have been because you're now scoring more runs.
Absolutely. And so, there's different ways to improve this team. I totally agree that I see it just taking shape late. That's the impression I get from anyone I've heard from, as far as looking ahead at what this next week looks like. And some of that has to do with teams, like the Blue Jays, where, they might not be fully certain as to what their position will be. I think they're going to be buyers, but as we were talking about, some of that could shift to small extents. And then you look at teams like the Mariners, teams like the Nationals, they really seem to be kind of on that edge, and what they do, how they view themselves could shift a fair amount in the next week or so. And so that will change the entire market. If the Mariners decide that they're going to make their inventory available, well, that's more supply, and then that shifts everything. So I do think that it requires a certain amount of patience. We've seen how the Blue Jays navigate these situations before. They have multiple plans in a row. They basically follow the roadmap that they create for themselves, and I would expect that to be the case in the course of the next week or 9 days, essentially 8 days until the deadline. But they do have, I think, more flexibility now than they did before they had acquired Simber, for example, when it was just, this is a tire fire. They need to address the bullpen. That's urgent. Now they can wait a little bit, especially with the time that the bullpen's had to rest, a lot of off days, the All-Star break. They're not so desperate, and then so they do need to improve, but it's not as though they absolutely have to make a move in any one category.
Yeah, it's very unemotional, and I am sorry to say that, because I wish it was like more romantic, right? And I wish it was more Hollywood-esque. But I just think that the across MLB, the days of like gunslingers and pushing your chips all in, like that stuff's over, man. Like the way these decisions are made are so process oriented now, and what the Blue Jays are doing right now is they are like gathering as much information as possible, which means they are like assessing what values are on every player. That's why it's like, whenever you hear these reports, the Blue Jays have asked about X, like the Blue Jays have inquired about Y. Yeah, of course they have. They've asked about every player who might be available. They've talked to every single team. They've talked about everyone because they want as much information as possible and what options they might have. And like you said, they are just going to line up like their plan and their alternatives and just kind of like go from thing to thing very objectively, like very empirically, in a very data-driven way, like with a defined process that, they believe will produce optimal decisions and prevent them from making subjective mistakes.
That's right. That's right. And I think, you can look back at their off season, right? And so many players that they were linked to. So we're going to see that again probably in the next week. And the Jays will show serious interest in a number of players, and they'll probably land some of them. I mean, I would expect in the next, lead up to the deadline, I would expect at least one, maybe multiple trades. Like I think that activity, that preparation, combined with the strong farm system, and just combined with the clues that the front office is giving us with their public statements, they're saying they're going to add. Okay, I'm going to expect that to happen in the course of the next week ahead of the deadline.
Dude, why wouldn't you? This front office has done exactly what it said it's going to do at every step of the way, and some of the heat they get, for inactivity or for it's completely bunk, man. They have everything they have said they're going to do, they have done, and they have said they're looking to add and get better at the trade deadline. So we can reasonably expect that they are going to look to add and get better at the trade deadline. I don't know why you would expect anything else. Yeah,
it is kind of funny when you look back and line up their comments with what they say. Like, they're low-key tipping their hand all the time, like not in a specific way, but they ahead of last offseason, you look back at Mark Shapiro saying, okay, we want to get multiple really good players or 2 elite players. They end up with Springer and Semien. So there's your 2 elite players. I mean, it's at the time, again, there's like this shock, or like the offseason before that, it's like they wanted to add multiple impact starting pitchers. They add Ryu and Tanner Roark. Well, turns out the Roark was an absolute disaster of a signing, but what they said they were intending to do ended up being what lined up with reality. So once you start to see that pattern, and I understand for fans who took a while to take in that information and believed that what they were being told was actually going to happen. I totally get that. But I think now we're starting to see this pattern where what they hint at ends up lining up with reality. So I'm at least, speaking for myself, I'm going to expect that they add.
Yeah, I know, and they say it in a very massaged and corporate way, right? But
Right.
like if you just take it for what it is, they're saying they're gonna add, and they're gonna trade, and they're gonna go out and get players. So that's what I expect is gonna happen. I just think that their own internal belief of what odds they have of making the playoffs are what's going to really inform just how aggressive they are on pure rentals, and not. I'm looking at the Fangraphs playoff odds right now as we sit here on July 22nd. 31.6%. To me, that suggests they aren't going to be super aggressive on pure rentals if they don't love the prices. Now, if by July 30th that those playoff odds look more like 45% or 50%, then I think you actually might see some pretty cool trades that we're going to be recapping at sportsnet.ca. That would be pretty interesting.
No doubt. And just to kind of wrap up that point about the Jays and what they say they're going to do. So fully expect they're going to add players. Whether those players are good, I don't know. Whether these moves are going to work out, I don't know. And the goal isn't just to add. The goal isn't just to do what you say you're going to do. The goal is to win and make the playoffs. And we don't know if the Blue Jays are going to do that. So by no means am I trying to say, this is, what an amazing front office they for doing what they say they're going to do. That's part of it. That's great. And that clarity helps. But the goal, of course, is to win the actual games on the field. And we don't know if that's going to happen in 2021.
Yeah, sometimes you come away with Robbie Ray. Sometimes you come away with Jonathan VR. Very different outcomes, depending on what happens at the deadline. Let's step away, but when we come back, we should talk more about Nate Pearson, who obviously is going to return in the bullpen and what impact that'll have on the Blue Jays. And by the way, we should probably talk about how the Blue Jays are going to play in Toronto. All that and much more when we continue on At The Letters. It continues on At The Letters. Arden Zwelling, Ben Nicholson Smith, our producers, Mike Tassoni, Andrew Norton. And it is time now for Keeping It Light, presented by Miller Lite. I remind you, you can send in Keeping It Light ideas or any questions, comments, concerns to @theletters@sportsnet.ca. Ben, this week we're going to stick on the trade topic here a little bit, and I'm going to put it to you. There's a lot of big names out there at the trade deadline: Chris Bryant, Craig Kimbrell, Richard Rodriguez, Nelson Cruz, Adam Frazier, Starlin Marte, Eduardo Escobar. So many interesting candidates out there. Which of the big name trade targets do you think would be the best fit for this Toronto Blue Jays roster?
Normally when I'm answering this type of question, I just try to go for impact. I just try to go for the biggest overall impact. Who is the best player? And I think that the best player will usually end up being the best addition. I mean, that's kind of the simplified way that I tend to look at these things. And so normally that would lead me away from relievers, because relievers, from a WAR standpoint, they're not going to generate as much value as an everyday position player, as a very good starting pitcher. But this time I look at the trade market, I look at the Blue Jays' needs, I actually land on Craig Kimbrell. And I think that you look at a guy who is performing at an extremely high level right now, peak level, one of the best relievers in baseball. He's available, and he's got an option for 2022, so he can help the Blue Jays or some contending team not only this year but next year. He is a dominant reliever. He is someone who would impact the current team as they try to make a push for the playoffs. And then if you get to the playoffs, he is someone who can close out the best lineups in baseball in high leverage moments and do it consistently. He's done it before. He's pitching at his absolute best right now. I think Kimbrell would be the guy, even though you could look at Barrios, you could look at someone like a Joey Gallo and make a strong case for them. But Kimbrell's already got 2 WAR. It's not like he's not making a difference. He's having an incredible season, and I think when you combine the overall impact with the potential for October difference making, he's the guy who has the potential to help this team. Whoever he lands on is going to get an incredible reliever and a huge help to their bullpen. And I think the Jays should be in on him.
Yeah, tough to argue with that. Just considering the obvious need in the Blue Jays bullpen. I think when you look at obvious needs of the Blue Jays, bullpen, third base, those are the very obvious ones. You went bullpen. I'll go third base, and I want to say Chris Bryant here, who isn't even really a true third baseman anymore because he's like playing center field and corner outfield spots. Like he's playing a different position every day, which is pretty remarkable, by the way, at like his size, that he has that kind of athleticism, and even, not the youngest guy in the world anymore. Kudos to him. But he's a little banged up, slumping a little bit lately. I'm kind of leaning Eduardo Escobar right now. And I remember stumping for Eduardo Escobar, like coming into the season, like a long time ago. And I have not seen anything that has made me change my mind. I mean, switch hitter, he'll play third base for you. He's got a bunch of pop, just steady hitter. He's not going to, light the world on fire, but like fine hitter, some power, pretty good defense, like better than I even expected, like 94th percentile outs above average guy.
Wow.
Really strong defense this year. Put him at third base. He immediately addresses that hole. He gives you, left-handed bat in lineup against righties. And Kevin Biggio moves more into a, not necessarily every day, still playing a lot, but more of like a utility role off your bench. I just think Eduardo Escobar would make this team a lot deeper. Diamondbacks have to trade him. There's probably going to be some competition in that market, I would imagine, but I think that he is just a really good fit on this club. So that's my guy.
I like it. He'd be a really good fit. He would help this team a lot. You've seen him already out there in the rumor mill. I feel like I've read a lot of White Sox rumors with him already this year. So there's going to be interest, as there should be, for a really good ball player. But yeah, he would help. And really, of all the big name additions, the Jays can consider a lot of them, and can look at a lot of different paths. But I think Kimbrel, Escobar, both those guys would make a big difference.
All right, let's talk about how the Toronto Blue Jays are returning to the city of Toronto, because obviously I had a week off last week. You weren't here 2 weeks ago. We haven't talked about a number of things, but this is like the most substantial one. After 670 days away from the city, the Blue Jays will be playing baseball at Rogers Center in front of 15,000 fans, roof open or closed. Just like a massive moment for this team that hasn't been in the city in a long time. Obviously, they had summer camp there in 2020, but it's not like fans got to see this team play. I mean, what do you think some of the biggest impacts are, whether it's on the players themselves, on the organization, on the community, on fans, on wins and losses? Like, what do you think the biggest impacts are of this move?
Honestly, I think, well, first of all, it's good that the Blue Jays are able to come back. I mean, it's been way too long since the Toronto Blue Jays played a game in Toronto. So I mean, it's really great to see that happening. And I think the biggest impact will honestly be for the fans after almost 2 years to have the Blue Jays playing some baseball, playing playoff baseball, having Vlad Guerrero Jr. emerge as one of the best players in baseball away from home. It's been too long. It's been just a long time since September of 2019 when Clay Buchholz was the starter on the mound for the Blue Jays. They were still in rebuild mode. They were on their way to a 95-loss season. They have not played a single game in Toronto since then. And you just think about just how much the organization has shifted from being in a rebuild to being a team that is contending, that has Marcus Semien and George Springer on it, that has some of these prospects who are just trying to establish themselves now be basically in their prime, in the early part of their prime, in the case of Vlad Guerrero Jr. And of course others on this ball club. So I think it's biggest for the fans. I think for the players, it's been tough. You can look at comments from guys like Ross Stripling, some very, very candid, honest comments about some of the challenges for their families, for themselves, as they navigate this uncertainty, this 3-city season. But these guys are used to it, or as used to it as any group of human beings gets, really. They live a nomadic lifestyle when it comes to their professional careers, and they're equipped to handle it. So I think it'll help them, but I think the biggest shift is for the fans and certainly for staff members within the Blue Jays organization who have been, nomads themselves and have been away from home for too long. But I think it's huge for the fans. What about you?
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because I think Arash Madani was saying this when we were on Blue Jays Central the last couple weekends. There's only 13 players on the Blue Jays who have actually played in Toronto. Yeah. Think about their starting rotation, right? Hyunjin Ryu, Robbie Ray, Steven Matz, Alec Manoah, Ross Stripling. Have any of those players pitched on a mound at Rogers Center? Your entire rotation, dude. It's just kind of wild how, you just like, I don't know. We all feel like we've like lost 2 years of our lives here since the pandemic hit, but it is kind of crazy to think that there are, how long they have been gone. And so like that is impactful. Like that is meaningful. And I'm sure you're experiencing this too. Like even just talking to people, friends, neighbors, whatever around the city, like people are like stoked that this is happening. People are like, I'm going to go to a Jays game next month, like I'm going to go to the Rogers Center and like it might be a nice day and the roof will be open and I'm going to drink like a $13 can of beer and I'm going to love it. I do think there is something about the team actually being in the city that makes fans feel more connected to it and more a part of it. So like you said, I think biggest impact is just fans and the community and the people of Toronto. For players, like I do wonder, I don't know if there's really going to be a meaningful impact on wins and losses. I think it'll help certainly to be playing in front of like a home crowd, but it's still going to be 15,000 people in a stadium that seats 50,000. So it's still going to feel a little weird. Like every game, I hate to be this guy, but like every game is going to be like the Minnesota Twins are in town in the middle of September, and
I don't know about it. I think it'll be more exciting.
It's only 15,000 people. That's the thing about Rogers Center. It's so big. If you only have 15,000 people in there, they can only do so much.
But they'll all be in the lower levels, and they'll all be pretty excited to be there. I think the atmosphere should be pretty good.
I don't know. We'll see. Right? I'm happy to be wrong about this.
Yeah.
I don't know how much 15,000 people in a stadium that big can really do. Like I think there is still going to be a little bit of an eerie vibe to it. And also remember it's baseball, right? So it's like 3.5 hours. It's not like college football where you're chanting and singing and cheering the entire way, right? Like there's going to be a lot of, dead air. But whatever. Screw the negatives, man. This is all positive. Unless you're like a player of the family, as Ross Stripling kind of indicated. And then maybe it's not so much a positive. Maybe it's not the easiest thing to deal with. Like just in general, right? Like I think like for a player, I don't know, man. Think about your own life, right? Like, and think about when you move or when you have to go and like find an apartment to lease or something like that. Like, it's it's draining and it's stressful and it's taxing mentally. It takes a lot of your time when you're like moving personally, like your house, your belongings, your stuff. You take a few days off work. You take some time to go through all of that. Blue Jays don't have an off day on either side of this thing. Like they've got to keep playing games on a nightly basis. And obviously like the Blue Jays players have a lot of resources and a lot of help with all this stuff. But, and I actually like heard the other day that the Blue Jays are actually going to, like the organization is going to put the players up at the Rogers Center Hotel through that whole first homestand, just to kind of take some of the burden off. So actually, if you're a Blue Jays player, you don't have to find a place until August 20th because you'll have that hotel room for the first homestand there starting on July 30th. So that helps. But I do think there is still like a lot of, it's going to be a tricky period, I think, for players. As I said, particularly for players with kids who obviously, like if you're under 12 years old, not going to be vaccinated, not going to be coming north with dad, because then that means that vaccinated dad actually can't leave the residence or the stadium, like has to be treated as if he is unvaccinated. And now you are having to make this like really tough decision as a ball player between like having family with you, which obviously you want to be, but then sacrificing your freedom of movement. And the other choice is being away from your family, which would suck, as Ross Stripling indicated, but then being able to like go outside and go to a restaurant.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Do some normal life things. It's funny you mentioned moving, and you know this, but our listeners wouldn't know. I moved a couple weeks ago, which is why I wasn't on the podcast. And, it was a busy time. Everything, went well. It's a busy time. And you think about, okay, if I had to play a Major League Baseball game every day in that period, there's no way. I couldn't even write about a Major League Baseball game every day. There's just too much to do. It's not possible. Like, it's crazy. So to pull this off, by the way, they're also crossing international borders as they pull off this move, which, that adds a whole other wrinkle to it in a pandemic with no off day on either side. And organizationally, that move day is also the trade deadline. So it's like there is so much going on. They are clearly a massive organization. They have the resources to have the baseball ops department focus on the trades, and they have lots of people working to make the transition as smooth as possible. The players, of course, in the center of it. That's going to be a crazy day. And I don't care how often, the Blue Jays say, oh, we've got a great system for it. We think it's going to go smoothly. I mean, that's going to be a wild, wild day for the entire organization and for the city. And I think it will be a lot of fun to see the Blue Jays back here once they get through the necessary hurdles, logistically, pandemic-wise, with the trade deadline, finding accommodations, clearing out of their current accommodations in Buffalo. It's just a lot going on, but I'm sure once they get here, it'll be a more stable feeling for them. Will that translate in the standings? I kind of doubt it, but it's still a good thing for the players and for the organization.
Yeah, it's just another hurdle Blue Jays players are going to have to deal with, right? They have earned everything this season, everything they've been through, right? Everything has been earned. Think about 2 moves now, 3 moves, whatever it is. And, I guess at least you have the knowledge that it's the last one. And that you are, okay,
yeah.
You have that certainty of we're going to be in Toronto now. Right? If this decision had been, put off and they had to continue on with that uncertainty of, are we going to be back on August 20th or not? How long are we going to be in Buffalo? Like, uncertainty like that in your life can have a big impact mentally, I think. It adds stress, right? And stress bleeds into performance, and stress impacts your recovery, and that could materialize in wins or losses. So I think that certainty is certainly a positive. And you kind of mentioned like some of the resources that the Blue Jays have and some of the staff that work on this. And like we often overlook, the staff who are working behind the scenes, and we kind of focus just on the players that we see on the field for 3.5, 4 hours every night, and on the, coaches we see in the dugout and Ross Atkins who we see on Zoom. But like there is, an army of Blue Jays staff who have been just as impacted by all of this. I mean, there are performance staff, development staff, marketing and PR folks, the fan experience and game day ops people. Like we're in Dunedin at TD Ballpark, we're in Buffalo at Salem Field working on, because there were fans in the stands, right? And working on game day stuff and fan experience stuff. Like these are all just regular workaday folks who don't have multi-million-dollar contracts, who don't lead sort of the pampered existences that professional athletes do, and they've been away from their families, and they've been going through the grounds crew. Man, Hazel May had the incredible story of the grounds crew on the broadcast the other night. The grounds crew has been away from their families. They have been in Dunedin. They have been in Buffalo. They've been making everything run smoothly behind the scenes. They've been making big sacrifices, all of these people throughout the organization. So I think that is a huge benefit to the organization. It's just for all those folks to get home and see family again. So, beyond obviously we're, talking about the Blue Jays, talking about wins and losses, talking about athletes, but like I do feel really good for all those folks in the organization who have been putting a ton of work in over the last 4 or 5 months, and now finally get to go home and have some certainty themselves.
Right. There's that group of people who get to return home. There's also a group of people who have not been able to work their jobs at Rogers Center, right? People who might help out with concessions or security, who might help us, with the elevator going up and down from one area to the other. I mean, that's a big group of people that obviously have not had that work available to them for a long period of time. So, the phrase "get back to normal" gets thrown out there way too casually and too much, but stepping back toward whatever this is, and it's not normal, but it's totally different than anything we'll have ever seen as far as baseball in Toronto or baseball in Canada. But getting back to actually just having baseball in Toronto, watching a ball game in the city that the Blue Jays are supposed to be playing in, it's going to be a great step. And I think that it's also going to lead for people who don't have the chance to get to Toronto and watch a game or aren't able to get tickets. It's going to lead to some cool TV. Like I think that we're going to, we might have, it'll sneak up on us just how fun it is and how much more fun it is to watch the Toronto Blue Jays play at Rogers Center compared to watching another game at Salem Field or watching them play another minor league game at Dunedin. It's going to be cool to have that aspect of it and see that even for the people who aren't there in person.
Yeah, no doubt. No easy way to transition into this, but Nate Pearson's going to the bullpen. Ben, Nate Pearson has a sports hernia after recurring groin injuries throughout the season. Went off for many opinions on that injury, and they've determined Nate Pearson has sports hernia. In a way, and it's funny to hear Ross Atkins describe it as a massive relief. It's a massive relief, this hernia, right? It's not a good thing, but it is a manageable injury, and it is something that somebody can compete through. Clearly not as a starter for Nate Pearson over the rest of the season, and even the Blue Jays are just up against it in terms of getting him stretched back out. So he's going to come back as a reliever. It's going to look something pretty similar to what we saw from him last season. I would expect he's a guy who could be stretched beyond one inning, maybe give you 2 innings, maybe take a full trip through the order. Obviously a big bullpen weapon to have if he's in the zone, and if he's just like fastball slider, and the fastball's 97 to 99 touching 100 and the slider's devastating. I mean, great. That's a huge weapon at the end of a game. That's someone you could use as an opener if you wanted to, if you want him to pitch first inning or two of a game. It allows him to get something positive out of this season. It allows him to get back on a mound and try to finish the season like feeling like he did something constructive, and it wasn't just like a completely lost year. I still think it wouldn't be a surprise to see this offseason some sort of a procedure to correct the hernia and to address the root cause of why he is suffering these recurring groin injuries. I would almost expect that that's something that's going to happen come late fall and winter. But what do you think could happen over the next 2 months that could have Nate Pearson exiting this season feeling good about what he was able to accomplish in 2021? Like, what's a successful August and September look like?
I think just staying on the mound, being able to take the mound with what we'll presume will be fastball, breaking ball, probably zone in on a couple pitches, maybe not see as many changeups, not see as many curveballs, but just to see him go out there and pitch regularly, pitch a couple times a week, and whether it's a couple innings, maybe it's depending on the day. I don't know if we see him back to back necessarily, probably not right from the outset, but basically help the team out of the bullpen on a regular basis and stay healthy. Like, I think it's that simple. If he's taking the mound with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball and a good breaking ball, he's going to be good. We saw that in the postseason last year against the Rays in the short stint. The stuff is there. I mean, if he's healthy, he's going to have the ability to help this team right away as a reliever, and that's going to be really interesting to watch. But the if he's healthy part, I think, still is a big variable. And I'm not assuming that just because he's a reliever, that necessarily makes it just a snap of the fingers to stay healthy all season. But we do know that upside is there, and even if he's a starter long-term still, which I think we still expect, it's going to be super interesting to see what he can do out of the bullpen right now.
What do you think this means big picture for the future with Nate Pearson? Because, not for nothing, going to turn 25 in August, right? Mm-hmm. So we do talk about him, as like one of the top pitching prospects in baseball, which he is, and a very important young piece for this club, which he is. But 25, right? Getting into his mid-20s here. Has not pitched a ton in his time as a professional. This is a guy who was drafted in 2017, and since that point, he has 148 minor league innings and 20 major league innings in his entire career. 168 innings pitched. So let's say he adds 20 at, in a best case scenario to that between now and the end of the season. I mean, he's going to have fewer than 200 innings pitched for his career then. What do you think that this move this season means or forecasts for his future as a starter, his future role in the organization, just how his career progresses from here?
Well, it is interesting, right? And we do have to kind of reset sometimes and think, oh yeah, he's 25 years old and he's been around for a good chunk of time now. With that being said, as long as he can physically withstand the rigors of starting, which not a medical professional, don't know the specifics of this sports hernia, but as long as he can physically withstand it, to me, keep starting him. I mean, this is And that's me talking. That's my opinion. Now, if I'm predicting what the Blue Jays will do, I land on the same answer, because if you're going to stretch Joe Biagini and Sean Reed Foley out and milk those guys, run them into the ground as starting pitchers, I think you're doing it for Nate Pearson,
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're going to do. And I also think that's the right decision when you, as long as he can physically withstand it, you just got to take your shots, because so often, whether it's, DeGrom or Bieber, these guys take a long time to develop. It's not a snap of the fingers. It's not day one they arrive and they're these finished products. It takes time. It takes patience. So as long as Pearson's mentally there and physically there with starting pitching and all that goes into that, I keep going with it. Is that how you see it?
So yeah, I think the Blue Jays absolutely will continue Nate Pearson on a starting track next spring. You look at this year, they were stretching out Julian Merriweather, and let's see if we can make Julian Merriweather a starter.
Right.
Julian Merriweather is 30, right?
Yeah.
And they still were looking to chase that potential and that impact.
Yeah, that's one where I would give up. He's a reliever or nothing at this point. Don't try to start him.
But I think that indicates to you what the Blue Jays are likely to do here, obviously. And I think they should, because I think that the upside and the potential of Nate Pearson is so great and so tantalizing that you absolutely have to exhaust that option, because it's not every day that you run into a guy with the type of velocity that he has and the type of premium secondary stuff that he has. There's a reason why he's the top right-handed pitching prospect in baseball. He might not be next year, but he has been for a number of years now for a reason, because his stuff is electric and because he could be really, really good. And because, for the lack of durability that we've seen to this point in his career, he does have a really solid big frame, and he does look like the type of guy who could withstand, a big league starting pitcher's workload. He's clearly just got to figure out a couple of, physical issues that he has dealt with to this point, but some of them he should not be knocked for, right? You take a comebacker off of your elbow, you can't be knocked for that, right? He had when he was young and coming up as well before he was drafted, he just grew too fast and his arm got all screwed up and some growth plates went wrong. You can't knock him for some of this stuff. So yeah, absolutely, you continue him on a starting pitcher's track next year, and hopefully in the end, you look back on his career and it just kind of looks like Chris Sale-esque, where it's there's these first couple of seasons as a big leaguer where he's a reliever and he doesn't have a ton of innings. It's kind of what was going on there? But then you have 4 or 5, 6 years after that where he's just a really solid MLB starter. As you said, with starting pitching, it can just take a while, man. It just takes, you can't think of starting pitchers in the same way that we think of position players, where you've got guys like Vlad and Acuna and Soto and Tatis showing up and are just electric from their early 20s. With starting pitchers, it's delayed and it takes a lot longer. So absolutely, you keep pitching Nate Pearson as a starting pitcher going forward, assuming he can hold up to it, and you exhaust those options and you don't make him a reliever permanently.
Even the starting pitchers who are having the kind of season that Nate Pearson wishes he was having, the young guys like Casey Mize or a Shane McClanahan, who are taking really big strides forward this year and emerging and hinting that, man, they could be all-stars in the big leagues. Even still, it takes time for those guys, and the Tigers are being really cautious with Mize and his innings. They're building him up slowly. Or McClanahan has these games where he throws 24 pitches an inning for 4 innings in a row, and he's out of the game after 4, and it's that's not a finished product, but they're still taking these big strides. So, and that's what Pearson wishes he was doing. That's what the Jays wish Pearson was doing, and it's not happening. So he's got a long way to go. There is no question about that. He is nowhere close to where he would want to be or where the Blue Jays would want him to be. But there's still time. This is a long process, and there's definitely still time, even if he's not there right now.
And for the short term, the extremely near term, Nate Pearson out of your bullpen is a massive weapon. I know people have kind of forgotten because you haven't seen him in a while, dial up the footage from the playoff game against Tampa Bay Rays last season. I think it was the second game of that series when he like just was untouchable over 6 or 7 batters faced, and striking out everybody, a ton of swing and miss. Like there is serious proof of concept there that Nate Pearson is going to be a real weapon for this team out of the bullpen. And I think that is like a massive addition to this bullpen. It is as if you went out and acquired like some other team's closer, right? Like you went out and acquired like a really big arm dude with really premium off-speed stuff, secondary stuff, I should say, because it's breaking ball, and he throws it hard as hell. And you insert that guy into the back end of your bullpen. Look, if you get to a point where like Jordan Romano like continues to kind of have a little bit of the ineffectiveness that we've seen, and isn't just like quite able to make the adjustments that he's trying to make right now, I don't think it's out of the question that Nate Pearson is actually this team's closer down the stretch and into the postseason.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a bold one. But I could see it. I mean, it's not crazy.
See it?
No, I could see it. I could. Oh, and by the way, my so Paxton's obviously out, but my Rogers Center prediction for the wild card game is still somewhat in play. Speaking of bold predictions, so
what was the prediction?
It was that Paxton would start the wild card game for the Blue Jays in Toronto.
Right.
Going into the season.
So, but your prediction now is just that the wild card game will be in Toronto.
Yeah, the prediction shot basically.
Yeah.
But your
what are you trying?
Your
to
Pearson
here?
one. I mean, I could see the Pearson one, getting a bit of traction. I could see scenarios where that would happen.
Yeah, totally. So lots going on with the Blue Jays, and lots to talk about over the rest of the season as the Letters continues on. I want to thank Andrew Norton and Mike Tassoni for producing this week. I want to thank all of you for listening. As always, he's Ben Nicholson Smith. I'm Arden Zwelling. This has been At the Letters.